So let's glance at his the chronology of his life, which you have on your sheets. So he was born in 1623 in Normandy. 1631, so he's 8 years old, he is sent to a boarding school. Which boarding school? The boarding school of La Flèche. Does that ring any bell? We saw La Flèche when we spoke about Mgr de Laval, when we spoke about the Canadian martyrs. Because a number of them studied there, and 1631, Saint Jean, I didn't have time to check, but it'd be worth checking. I think Saint Jean de Brébeuf was there at that moment. He left in 32 or 33 to go back to Quebec. So, La Flèche was the great Jesuit college for boys in France. And a number of our Canadian martyrs had studied there, had been professors there. Saint Jean de Brébeuf was there in 28, 29, maybe in the, I forget, the 16, early 20s. He was there. So, and in La Flèche, they were receiving what publication, which was popular in France? The Relations, the Jesuit Relations. So, which were the accounts. It's a yearly account, a little 100-page, 200-page. What happened the last 12 months in Canada? The mission, different chapters, the life of the Indians, their customs, their conversion, stories of the missionaries, whatever. This was read. It was like hot bread. Whenever it came, it was copied and distributed. Remember, it was through the Relations that Mgr de Laval, Marie de l'Incarnation, Madame de la Pelletrie, Jeanne Mance, Marguerite Bourgeois, Maisonneuve, all the greats, it is through the readings of these Relations that they heard about Canada. And they had the desires to go to Canada. It was the main publication speaking of Canada. So he studied from the age of 8 to 18, 10 years. He went through the Jesuit curriculum, Ratio Studiorum of the Jesuits. And so he met some of the great Jesuits of the time. He made lots of friends among them. That will continue later on. 1641 to 47, he moves to Paris to do his seminary at another Jesuit seminary, Clermont. He must have met then, certainly heard of, but I wouldn't be surprised he met St. Isaac Jogues. Remember, after being spending 1 year in Aurisville as a prisoner, he escaped and he went back to France for 1642 for a couple of years. And he was like a walking relic. The Queen invited him to Versailles to see his hands that had been eaten by the Iroquois, cut into pieces. He had no more fingers. And so he was, walking these marble floors and these crystal chandelier and all this. This man who had been sleeping in the snow and eaten alive, he's almost eaten alive and he was a saint. So young François de Laval heard about this. And maybe he met St. Isaac Jogues because Clermont was a Jesuit seminary. And if I had been the superior of the Clermont Seminary in these days, I would have made sure that this martyr would come and talk to the seminarian about the missions, to put fire in their hearts, because that's how a young man, they just want to challenge, they want to go to the difficult missions. During that time, by the way, is while he was in a seminary, his two older brothers died. They were military, they were soldiers, and so he became the eldest of the family, and his mother and his uncle, who was a bishop, the Bishop of Évreux, tried to get him to stop his seminary and come home and manage the family property in Montigny, in Normandy. It's interesting because reading this, a little bit the same thing happened to St. Pius X. When Giuseppe Sarto, the future St. Pius X, when he was in a seminary, his father died when he was 16 years old. And there were 10 kids in the family. Well, the first had died. Giuseppe was the second. So the father dying, Pius X, as a 16-year-old boy, became the eldest of the family. And his uncle went to see him in the seminary. He said, Giuseppe, you must go home to help your mom raise your 8 siblings. It's a tough decision. Either to continue your studies and you see your family struggling at home, or you quit your vocation. And a young 16-year-old, it's a very difficult decision. But Giuseppe Sarto said, no, God wants me to be a priest. I'm going to stay here. My mother is a strong Catholic. She believes in providence. My sisters, even if they're 12, 13, 14, they can help her. They're hard workers. God will provide. Thank God he did. We would not have St. Pius X. Same thing happened with St. François de Sales about 200 years before. He was at the seminary and his father had died. His 2 older brothers died, and so he was the eldest. But he said, no, I'm not going to quit my studies. He becomes a priest in 1647, May 1st, priestly ordination. And very soon, so I told you that his uncle, maternal uncle, was the bishop of the Diocese of Évreux. And so he asked young Father François to become archdeacon. It would be the equivalent of vicar general. It's a big diocese, 155 parishes. So he basically had to manage the diocese. He had to take care of convents. He had to visit the different parishes. He learned at Providence, you see, was preparing him. Just as Archbishop Lefebvre spent many years as a young priest and then as an archbishop working on seminaries. Later on, he would found a society of seminaries, SSPX. Saint François de Laval, as a young priest, had to manage a diocese with his uncle. So he learned how to manage a diocese, although he was just a young priest of 24, 25 years old. During that time, along with this lasted for not so long, but he kept in touch with his friends of the seminary, and they created a society of friends called la Société des Bons Amis, the Good Friends Society. They're all priests like him. There were a few laymen as well. They would meet. They would pray together. They would have retreats. They were like a confraternity of priests. I told you it is important for priests to share his life with other priests, discuss moral cases, whatever. And so he is part of this society of the bons amis. And in 1653, a priest came from Vietnam, French priest who had been in Vietnam, Father de Rode. I think he was a Jesuit. And he came to Europe to ask the Pope to send bishops in Asia that would not be under the King of Spain or under the King of Portugal. Because at that time, Spain and Portugal, they were colonizing the world. Think of the Philippines, you have India, you have Indonesia, you have Malaysia today, you have South America, you have, they were powerful. And practically, so that was their domain, like South America, except for Brazil. Brazil belonged to Portugal. The rest of South America belonged to Spain. So the King of Spain, although Spain is a small country, was ruling the whole continent of South America. So every bishop that was there had to get the placet or the green light from the king as well. The church was working with these Catholic kings. Philippines is called the Philippines because of Philip II, King of Spain, who was a friend of St. Pius V a few years before what we're talking now. So you have to understand, they call them the patronage, the patronage of these Catholic kings over huge territories. But there were new mission fields, China, Japan, Vietnam, Cambodia, Siam, which is Thailand. These were unknown territories, and they were not under the King of Spain or of Portugal. So they were like no man's land, speaking of Catholic kings. So this priest came from Vietnam, Father de Rode, asking the Pope to send bishops in these areas which were not under the other kings. You follow? So Father de Rode, who was French, came to France, and he got into the Jesuit network, and he met this Société des Bons Amis. He said, there's a bunch of good priests there. And he talked to them about this. And he suggested to Rome these priests who were together. And by the way, among this group, you have St. John Eudes, as well, the founder of the Eudist Fathers. St. Vincent de Paul is alive. He's in that world. St. Francis de Sales is dead. But we're talking about the 17th century. There's great people in France. And although France is a big country, nevertheless, there's the Catholic clerical society in Paris. They all know each other. You have Monsieur Ollier as well, with the Sulpician, who are concentrating on the formation of priests. So, Father de Rode goes to the Society of Les Bons Amis, and I don't know how it worked, whether it's the bishop who chose, the Pope who chose, or they agreed that three of them, among them you had François de Laval, François Palu, another François, and Father Pic as well, another one, that they would become bishop, and it would be sent to the Far East, to China, to Vietnam, and another place. to Asia. But, and this is what I'm telling you about politics. You would think this is great. Send bishops to these countries where there's no priests or they're making martyrs. The kings stepped in. The king of Portugal said, we don't want French people over there. We don't want Jesuits over there. They wanted to control. Father Palu, François Palu, by the way, is the founder of the Foreign Missions of Paris, Mission Étrangère de Paris, known as MEP. Saint Théophane Vénard was one of them. The MEP fathers, their house, I'm sure you don't know many streets in Paris, but one street you do know, La Rue du Bac. La Rue du Bac is the Miraculous Medal, the chapel of the Miraculous Medal. Well, I may be inverting, but it's something like the chapel of the Miraculous Medal is number 127 of La Rue du Bac, and the fathers of the MEP is 141. It's the next block, or the opposite, 141 to 127. But the two numbers are correct, 127 to 141, just one block away. That's where they were training priests for the missions. And that was founded by François Palu, who was a member of La Société des Bons Amis with Mgr de Laval. So, François de Laval heard that he was going to be a bishop for the Far East. He went to Rome. By the time he arrived in Rome, because you have to walk and take the horse and the boat or whatever, no train, no cars, Rome had said, no, we're not doing it. Meanwhile, François de Laval had given up all his patrimony, all the family properties. He had given up all his goods because I'm going away, plus the Société des Bons Amis, they really wanted to live in poverty. He was a great, the closer you get to God, the less you want the things of this world. We have that in the liturgy. Read the prayers of St. Peter of Alcantara of yesterday, October 19th. First Friday Mass, we ask to despise the earthly things and aspire to the heavenly things. So, François de la Salle had given up everything to be a bishop in the Far East, and then he finds out that he's not going. So, a man of God, he says, so be it. He could have gone back to Évreux to work for his uncle as an archdeacon, but instead he decided to go and live in, it's called a hermitage, that a very saintly man, Mgr de Laval, was running. He's not a priest, he's a layman. You actually know him. All our stories are crisscrossing. Mgr Bernier was the man who married Madame de la Peltrie, who was cured by St. Joseph miraculously after she made a vow to give her fortune to open an Hôtel Dieu hospital in Quebec. She made a vow, St. Joseph cured her. She was married, her husband died very young. And then she said, well, I'm going to give my fortune. Her parents objected. Her father said, you are not giving the family fortune, like this. And you must get married again. And through the Jesuits, so they got a kind of a white marriage where Mgr de Bernier, who was well known as a man of God, agreed to have a wedding, a proper wedding, but they would live like brothers and sisters. And so then she said, well, I'm married now, so I can give my fortune away. Because he wanted to live like a monk, more or less. And so that enabled Madame de la Peltrie to go with Marie de l'Incarnation to Quebec. And they're the two who went to Quebec. So that is the husband of Madame de la Peltrie, who by now has a big mansion in Normandy where very spiritual priests and lay people come and live a kind of a community life, a bit like you would come to Saint-Césaire, although we're not that holy, but it's a place where you can go and spend some time, do a retreat and read and talk with the priest and so on. So, François de Laval goes there. He will spend 4 to 5 years, from 53 to 58. He is at that hermitage with Monsieur de Berdien. By then, so now we're in 1658, Rome decides to give Quebec a bishop. Things are developing in Quebec along the St. Lawrence, both Quebec first, Three River, and Montreal. And so it's time to give a bishop to Quebec. Hell broke loose. When it was announced that Rome was about to send a bishop to Quebec, the Archbishop of Rouen said, "No way, no way." And he blocked the consecration of François de Laval as a bishop. He blocked his going to France. He says, "I'm the bishop in charge of Quebec. There'll be nobody else." There's a nasty chapter in the life of François de Laval, but he says, it's not my problem. If God wants me to go, I'll go. He stayed at the hermitage praying. He says, if the Pope wants me to become a bishop, God wants me to be a bishop, fine. But what is amazing when you read the story, it's of this politics, church politics. François de Laval just kept silence. No? A bit like Gamaliel. Remember Gamaliel in the Bible, in the Acts of the Apostles, where they wanted to stop the apostles. Caiaphas wanted to stop and had a meeting, and Gamaliel stood up and he said, "Well, Reverend High Priest, if this work is from God, you will not be able to stop it. If it's a man's work, it will die by itself." And so François de Laval said the same thing. If God wants me to go, well, he'll get me there. To make a long story short, he has to be consecrated bishop secretly in a little chapel in Paris on December 8, 1658. And because the Archbishop of Rouen is still holding the reins and controlling these matters, so Rome very diplomatically decides to make François de Laval not the Bishop of Quebec, but simply a vicar apostolic, apostolic vicar, which is something new, which nobody knows. What does it mean? You're a bishop, but you don't have a diocese. But you're a bishop in charge of a territory, which is not a diocese. Later on, there will be these vicariates here in Canada. If you know the story of the OMI, as they push the missions further north, they start dividing different parts of the north, and they're not dioceses because they're too big, but they're like mission regions called vicariates. And the one in charge is called a apostolic vicar. Monsignor Charlebois is one of the famous ones, vicariate of Keewatin, north of Manitoba. And these are all Monsignor Turcotil in Hudson Bay. So, Vicar Apostolic. So finally he does arrive in Quebec, June 16, 1659. So this year is what? 360 years, 60th anniversary of the arrival of Bishop de Laval in Quebec. Question? The king. He had to negotiate with. This is that's the history of the church. If it's great to have Catholic kings, but there's some setbacks, some side effects. They have power, and one of the power, which is you find regularly in the history of the church, is the power of appointment of bishops. What is happening right now with China, with Pope Francis agreeing with a communist government, whereas that's the wrong thing, it has happened with Catholic kings. Because, as we have seen at the beginning, bishops have power. And the kings want to make sure the bishop is on their side. That's the politics behind. And if the bishop decides to be against the king because the king does something wrong, the bishop has power. And so that's why you have this tension. And in the appointment of bishops, the Pope would have to consult the king, and because they have to work together. Because also Quebec was under France. It was called the New France, the Nouvelle France. So, to what degree, the king had a say, but he had to agree to the appointment. And so Rome came up with the idea of a vicar apostolic. So he's a bishop, but does not have a territory. I don't know if we could say that our bishops in a society, although they're more auxiliary bishops, assisting the superior general, we have a superior general. But over there, so the superior of Bishop de Laval, I think it was the Pope directly. It was directly under the Pope, I would guess so. I found last night, just before coming, in our library in Saint-Césaire, a precious book. We actually have the whole collection. It's a series of books, all the pastoral letters of all. This one here is of all the bishops of Quebec. So this book here is 1887, volume 1. And I was hoping we had volume 1. I knew we had other volumes, but we have volume 1. Okay, if we have volume 1, we got the letters of Bishop de Laval. He was the first bishop. And it's interesting, the very first ordinance of Bishop de Laval, datum Quebeci tertio di Augusti anno millesimo sexagentesimo sexagesimo. This ordinance, it's in Latin, it's just a one page, given in Quebec the 3rd of August, 1660. So he arrived in June, so this is just 14 months later. His first official letter, what is it? You'd be surprised, but he's obliging all the clerics in Quebec to recognize him as the bishop, the one in charge of the territory. Very interesting. He says here, to all our beloved priests and clerics, greetings in the Lord. Desiring the proper for the proper dignity to our office, episcopal office, as vicar apostolic, we want all those who are in this church entrusted to us as much as possible, and particularly that this church may be subjected to the Holy Father, that his authority and his sovereign right be recognized by all. According to the reverence and devotion that is required, we order, mandamus vobis, we order every one of us, omnibus et singulis presbyteris, all and each priest and every cleric, having rejected, omni aliena jurisdictione reacta, having rejected every other jurisdiction, even in good faith, from the Archbishop of Rouen, he's mentioned by name, or from any other bishop that you may have received, that you recognize only one bishop here in this Canadian church, is yours truly. We order this, and there's a whole bunch of signatures here. Interesting. So if he writes this, it's because even 1 year after he's there, there's still problems. To say that, listen, I'm your bishop, I was appointed here by the Pope, I have to give an account to the Pope about the way I manage this church, so please obey me. Please, and I order you to obey me. 1660, problems. At the same time, pretty much at the same time, and when you read the ordinance of the bishop, you see the issue of alcohol is a first major problem. What is interesting is that's the first moral issue St. Francois de Laval had to deal with. Today we have the problem with cannabis. Something to the equivalence of where it's a drink or a plant, whatever, that causes addictions and causes you to lose your mind. It's interesting. So we need to have strong bishops who will strongly condemn all these things which are allowed and tolerated and encouraged by the government. Okay. So the problem is so bad. There's a letter, one of his first letters is about the selling of alcohol to the Indians. In 1662, he has to go back to France to tell the Pope, please tell the governor and tell everybody to obey my laws, and because here are the problems. The image we're giving to these people about France is disastrous. It is in that trip back to France, 62-63. So the main issue was the selling of alcohol to the Indians, but also he got the king to approve the opening of a seminary. Because on October 63, as he came back, he founded the Mgr de Québec, the first seminary in Quebec, in Canada, which will be very, very interesting. Let me just read you a few passages from this book here. And the seminary, we'll start with 5 seminarians. He has 6 priests as teachers. There was a boys' school, the College of Quebec, which has been started by the Jesuits in 1635. The seminary is a big name. The king approves the foundation of a seminary, but the first seminary was simply the presbytery of one of the priests, Father de Bernière. So Mgr de Laval says in the relation of that year, I have established in this Church of Canada a seminary for young Canadians aspiring to the priesthood, that they may be trained in ecclesiastical discipline, And I have entrusted the direction of the seminary to 6 priests who will fulfill their task with zeal and efficiency. I do not doubt that this seminary will produce many good fruits with the grace of God. The king has confirmed with his authority what I have done, and all the papers have been recorded in the sovereign council of this country. With these 6 priests who are running the seminary, practically all other priests will connect to the seminary of Quebec. There will be very, very few secular priests, so non-Jesuit, non-Recollet, non-Sulpician. The Sulpician were in Montreal, but there were other priests, but all the priests except a very small minority from 63 to 92. So for about 30 years, priests were living together long period at a time. If you had a parish, you might go to your parish, you were in charge of a parish, but you could come back to the seminary to refresh, to follow a retreat, to spend a few weeks. Another priest will take your place, like we do in the society. Very much like we do in a society. It's a hub of priests, and priests go out on mission and come back. And if he's sick, or another priest will take his place. And so that the priests are strengthened, because quam bonum et iucundum habitare fratres in unum, how great it is, we read in the Psalms, for brothers to live together. And believe me, it is very true. It's a great boost for the priesthood. And in the seminary life, the priests, they were secular, they're not religious. But they would, one of the conditions to come to seminary, you give away all your goods. You practice poverty, absolute poverty. The seminary takes care of you. And all the money that is collected by tithing in the parishes come to the seminary to support the seminary. Because that's another big issue. So we have alcohol, we have the seminary, and we have the creation of parishes. The creation of parishes was difficult because there were few people. Few people, few priests. So if you have a parish, you have to support the priest. You have to build him a house, buy his food, give him food, take care of him, wood for the winter, have to take care of him, and so on. And a lot of these parishes were just poor peasants, farmers. So to avoid a disbalance between wealthy parishes and poor parishes, Bishop de Laval said, all the tithing of all the parishes will go to the seminary, will support the priest, and then they'll take care of you. And that lasted for 30 years in Quebec. He says here, one of the priests, all our goods are common with those of the bishop. And Bishop de Laval did the same thing. He did not have a palace. There was no palace. He was living in a little room in a seminary. I've never seen between us any distinction between the poor and the rich. Your birth, the conditions of your birth, we're all brothers. Detachment, self-denial is essential, wrote Bishop de Laval. That is the heart of the spirit of grace maintaining this seminary. So, and that seminary exists to this very day, 2019. So it has been lasting since 1663. However, now it's a different ballgame. The building is there. There's some seminarians studying inside, but they're not training priests the way they used to train priests. There's about 10 or 15 seminarians. Back in the 60 or 59, I think they went up to close to 150 or 200 seminarians. Now there's almost nobody inside. It's a tragedy. 1666, the bishop consecrates his cathedral, the first cathedral in Canada. '66. 1668, now he has the minor seminary. You see, the concern of these bishops is, I need helpers. Today we spoke about the missions. The king in the parable of the gospel of the 19th Sunday after Pentecost, the king sends servants to call the guest, to call other people. But the king must have servants. The bishop must have priests. And so that's why these bishops understood the first work of a bishop, like the first works of parents, is to have kids. The first works of a bishop is to make priests. That's why the seminary is the heart of a diocese. And that's why Archbishop Lefebvre's work, the saving of the institution of seminaries, is the heart of the whole church. Because today we have popes who are back to tradition. Their first concern will be, I need good bishops. The next question is, where have these men been trained? Do they have a good training? And just like at the time of Archbishop Lefebvre, so many French bishops came out of the French seminary because it was a greenhouse of bishops. Oh, he's been trained at a French seminary. Okay, excellent mark. You know, you have a kind of checklist where you've been trained. And so that's why I think, with all due respect, and it's in the hands of providence, but and I'm not the only one, but that our seminaries were still young in the church. We only have 50 years of existence. Will be a greenhouse of bishops for tomorrow. The day there's a major change in the church for the good, when Russia is consecrated or whatever, and they will need bishops, they will go and get some bishops from the seminaries of the society. I'm sure. And that was the goal of Archbishop Lefebvre. And that's always the highest goal. He said that in a conference. He even said, one day we hope to have a seminary in Rome. And so the bishops, they will be really Roman. But, and that will be the highest way the Society of St. Pius X will be able to help the church, by start giving out bishops for the church. This is not new. I told you about the French seminary in Africa, in northern Africa, Morocco, Egypt, all these countries in northern Africa. Back in the 5th century, so the 400s, there was one monastery in Carthage. Who was the bishop of Carthage? St. Augustine. I think 300 bishops came out of that monastery. 300 bishops in the North Africa. All the bishops came from that monastery because they had known St. Augustine. They had been pupils of St. Augustine. So, but the same thing is going to happen with the church. And but the same thing is happening with us right now. We have our seminaries, but very soon, I'm going to SSPX, back in, say, the 1980s, 1990s, we see the young men arriving in a seminary, and a lot of them were conversions or come from mass centers or homeschoolers or family that discovers tradition when the boy is 18 years old, but he has no formation. So one of the apostolates of the Society of St. Pius X, it's the 4th one in our list, but it has become a major one, is boys' school, high school for boys, like we have in New Hamburg. Because out of these boys' high school, we will get vocations. The Jesuits had their college. They had the same thought in 1635. Because they're very keen, and that's why the Jesuits were so strong, because they understood we need to take the boys at 10 years old and mold them according to the kind of priest we want. Bishop de Laval did the same thing. So he founded the minor seminary in 1668. 1669, a beautiful day, he baptizes in his cathedral the chief of the Confederation of the Iroquois, Garangontier, and the governor is his godfather. There has been many governors over the years, but this governor is a good one. Imagine 1669, 20 years after the death of Saint John de Brébeuf, 49, the chief of all the Iroquois tribes goes to Quebec and is baptized. It's wonderful. The blood of martyrs is a seed of Christian. It took 20 years, and then after 69, that whole area in Ontario Midland, that whole Iroquois territory, Arisville, there's a lot of conversion of the Iroquois. We will see next Sunday Saint Catherine Tekakwitha. It will be a fruit also of this period. They're not all converted, but conversion of the Iroquois makes a big leap forward. 1671, Bishop de Laval goes back to France. One of the main things that happened during this time is to ask for the king and the Pope to erect Quebec as a diocese, to make Quebec a diocese. And in 1674, I didn't put it there. Well, I put it above in a previous section. Quebec becomes a diocese. In the 1680s, Bishop de Laval is pretty tired, and he goes to France to give his resignation to resign. And the king is the king who had some difficulties with him, but this time, to recognize his worth, he says, choose your own successor. And he had a number of priests he could choose from. It was Abbé de Saint-Vallier, who was a priest. He was not consecrated until 1688, who was extremely dynamic, but with a terrible temper, terrible character, so much that he went to Quebec as a vicar general, as a priest. He did the first trip to Quebec, and everybody turned against him. The priest who was appointed to become their bishop, and the priest of Quebec wrote a letter to Bishop de Laval, who had chosen him, telling him, please, please, change. Don't give us this priest as a bishop, please. And Bishop de Laval called Father Saint-Vallier, says, Father, I don't think it's a good idea at the end that you go to Quebec. He got into a fit of anger, and he went to the king, and the king said, no, he's going to be the bishop. And it became very, very difficult with Bishop Saint-Vallier. Nevertheless, what is beautiful in the life of Mgr de Laval is that, I have it here, Bishop de Laval, Bishop de Laval steps down, let Monseigneur de Saint-Vallier, Bishop Saint-Vallier, rule the diocese, and actually he undid what Monseigneur de Laval had done. Like he said, now the priests will be living in their parishes. he dismantled the community of priests. And he had a lot of problems. So much problems that back in 1700, Pope Louis XIV, the king, said, finally, we made a mistake. And he tried to get Bishop Saint-Vallier to resign. And the bishop said no, even to the king. He said, well, all right. And the king went back on the ship. A few days after they left France, they met some Protestant ships who took all the people on board prisoners, including the bishop. Bishop Saint-Vallier was brought to London Tower, and the English government says, this is big money to get a ransom for a bishop. This is worth a lot. And the king said, I'm not giving the ransom. He says, no, you can stay in jail. Divine Providence has intervened. Meanwhile, Bishop de Laval managed the diocese respectfully to Bishop Saint-Vallier, even if there was lots of disagreements. But so he was known as Monseigneur l'Ancien, the old Bishop de Laval. His main virtues, as you have there, were great humility. Here it is. Tremendous humility. Everybody mentioned his great humilities. Great poverty. It's interesting to know that one of the main virtues of a bishop is poverty. Very interesting to know that. It reminds me of when St. Pius X had a battle war with the French government in 1904, 1905. The French government was about to seize every church property in France, including all the cathedrals, all the priest's house, all the bishop's house. The French government was going to put hand on that. And so they were discussing in Rome. Pius X was discussing with one of his cardinals. And they were saying, well, it was really an iron fist. And the cardinal tells Pius X, Holy Father, do you realize if you say no, the Archbishop of Paris will be thrown on the street. Literally, on the street with nowhere to go. St. Pius X replied, I can always appoint a Franciscan as Archbishop of Paris. He made a vow of poverty. He's the son of St. Francis. But Francois de Laval would have been a bishop according to the heart of St. Pius X, for sure. Great poverty. And one of the problems with the bishops of today, it's not known, but knowing the history of the church, knowing certain things of what is being said, there's certainly a lot of blackmail behind the bishop's position and a lot of money involved. And so it's great to have a bishop who is totally poor. They say, it's hard to understand, it is said that Bishop de Laval did not heat his house. This is 1680s, 90s in Canada. How did he do this? Okay, I don't know, but it said a few places that he did not heat his house, minus 20, 30, 40. Great charity. Whenever he visited the diocese from Gaspésie all the way to Montreal, Ville-Marie, he went all the way to the Great Lakes. Great charity, great zeal for souls. We have seen a great resignation to God's will, whatever God's will. Always, God's will is our sanctification. So, and you have there also on page 2 of your sheets, I don't have time to develop this, but Bishop de Laval and the Canadian devotions, he did not start the devotion to St. Joseph with 1624, but he certainly promoted it. Same thing with the Holy Family. Although he is the one who approved the confraternity of the Holy Family, and in the books of the pastoral letters and ordinances of the bishops of Quebec, we have the first document praised by the popes, even the Pope, I think Leo XIII, praised the confraternity of the Holy Family, mentioning Bishop de Laval. And devotion to Saint Anne. Saint Anne, the shrine of Saint Anne de Beaupré, the devotion came way back in the 1660s. So, great devotion. The first chapel is thanks to him. So, try to get a hold of books on him. I did not check what was available in English. In French, there are a few books. But read about these great figures of our Canadian history. Thank you very much.